So today we're going to start off, I think there's another slide after this. We're going to start off on our series as we've been announcing, the miracles of Christ. And honestly, John uses the word sign. The word miracle is in the Bible. I probably would prefer the sign. The sign points to something else, but miracle, what it means, it's the same word that you see in Acts, where it talks about dunamis, the power that comes upon, okay? It's dunamason, it's the noun. It means the capacity of that power. It's functional power. And so it's these functional, powerful things that are seen that come forth from God that prove, point, sign, show you his divinity. And so walking up to Easter, we're going to spend the next 7 weeks talking about some of those signs, depending on how you want to count them. In the Bible, there's, I've seen as low as 28, as high as 38 things seen to be miracles of Christ. We're going to look at a few of those. The first is actually the first miracle that Christ does in the book of John. And if you want to turn to John 2, we're going to look at the first 12 verses there. And I'll read through it, and then we'll come back and do as we normally do, talk through it. John 2, 1 to 12. On the third day, there was a wedding at Cana in Galilee, and the mother of Jesus was there. Jesus also was invited to the wedding with his disciples. When the wine ran out, the mother of Jesus said to him, "They have no wine." And Jesus said to her, "Woman, what does this have to do with me? My hour has not yet come." His mother said to the servants, "Do whatever he tells you." Now there were 6 stone water jars there for the Jewish rites of purification, each holding 20 or 30 gallons. Jesus said to the servants, "Fill the jars with water." And they filled them up to the brim. And he said to them, "Now draw some out and take it to the master of the feast." So they took it. When the master of the feast tasted the water, now become wine, and did not know where it came from, though the servants who had drawn the water knew, the master of the feast called the bridegroom. And he said to him, Everyone serves the good wine first, and when people have drunk freely, then the poor wine. But you have kept the good wine until now. This is the first of his signs Jesus did at Cana in Galilee, and manifested his glory, and his disciples believed in him. After this, he went down to Capernaum with his mother and his brothers and his disciples, and they stayed there for a few days. Thus saith the word of God. And so as we look at this text, it seems like just a normal, everyday happenstance. I mean, in a church the size of the one I come from, there's a wedding every weekend, maybe several each week. All right? But it's part of the culture. It may look different. A Jewish wedding would last for a week at least. And it would start off probably in the middle of the night. And the groom would go claim his bride, and then they would put them in some kind of carryable carriage or maybe a rolling cart or something, and they would parade them through the streets, taking the most circuitous route through whatever village or neighborhood they lived in, so that all the people could come out and give them blessing and see what was going on. And then there would be ceremony after ceremony. In my culture, it's usually a honeymoon where you go away for a week. But in their culture, it was basically you go to the house that you're going to take, and it's open house for a week. The very opposite of what we do. We go and get away. What they do is they entertain. And so people would come day after day after day, morning to night, celebration, music, food, drink, dancing, everything. It was a very festive and very social event. And it seems like, what's the big deal? Why is Jesus? Is this a luxurious thing that he's about to do? Why waste the first miracle on something so common? And you're going to see that Jesus doesn't take humanity as common. He takes humanity in its fullness. He comes as divinity, but he doesn't just drop in and show his superiority. He enjoys the fellowship, the march, the walk through with people in his day. On the third day, in this text, if you want to read commentaries upon commentaries upon commentaries of what's not in this text, man, there's volumes. There's so many questions that are left unanswered in this text. And I may, because of my own proclivity of liking of observation and things, I may share some of those with you today. But really, what you need to stick to when you come to a text like this is what is there? What is there? All right? Sometimes what is not there is important. But on the third day, if you're following the book of John, John's going to share 7 of these signs throughout the first portion of his book. He's showing that Christ is truly who he says he is. He starts off in John 1 saying that he is the creator in the beginning. All right? And you're going to see that in this first miracle, only the creator could do what's about to happen. All right. The third day, if you follow John 1 and 2, you would see that he demarks 3-4 days. And then, and this is kind of coincidental, you don't want to set a whole lot of theology on it. And then he goes, and then after the third day. And so this would have been the 7th day in the beginning of John, if you want to count it that way. All right. So it would have been the day of rest. It would have been the day of completion. It would have been the day of perfection in many ways. Again, don't make too much of it here. But here on the third day, there was a wedding at Cana. Cana was just a little bit, maybe 10 miles or so, or was it kilometers? I always forget what mind I'm reading in, but it was 10-something from Nazareth, okay? And I think it was in the direction of Capernaum, which is where they're going to go down by the coast. We did the miracle of the coin in the fish's mouth that happened there on the beach. So this is in Jesus's backyard. And you're going to see all kinds of references in these first 3 verses that they knew these people and probably knew them really well. On the third day, there was a wedding at Cana in Galilee. And notice the order of invitations. And the mother of Jesus was there. Not Mary, the mother of Jesus. So she had gotten an invitation. Jesus also was invited to the wedding, being Mary's son. And they must have known the significant work Jesus was doing because they also invited the disciples, which probably wasn't all 12 at the time. If you follow the chronology, he may have had 5 to 7 at this point. And so Jesus and his disciples start showing up as well. So Jesus is going in here to enjoy the activity, the festivities of life together. I think a lot of people sometimes paint Jesus as this solemn, sacred dude, and he is all of that, but he's also very human. Charles Spurgeon writes in his book, he writes a book to young men going out to be preachers, to lessons to my students or something like that. And he goes, I can show you many a men who dress in black, all prim and proper, wear the hat, wear the coat, wear the boots, and look the part. And they ought to go sell insurance, or they ought to go into banking, because Jesus wasn't that type of pastor. Jesus was involved. He was very familial, very inundated with the going-ons of the people. It gets right into the problem. The wine runs out. You know, in America, not every wedding would have wine at it. If we didn't have wine for a meal in America, that would be not a big deal, probably. But for most, especially if we're having French people over to dinner, if we look at the wine rack and there's no wine, I'm jumping in the car and heading up to Vin de Goutte Goutte de Vin because we need wine. All right? And so we can understand this probably a little bit better than my home culture. The wine is running out. It would have been a disaster for a wedding that people are coming and going through the house all week long, and all of a sudden, somebody hadn't planned to have enough wine. All right? And there probably wasn't a convenience store. I'm sure they could figure it out, But the mother of Jesus said to him, they have no wine. Again, no title here. No Mary. Just the mother of Jesus. In fact, she's going to be referred to that throughout this entire passage. And Jesus said to her, woman, what does this have to do with me? It really sounds a little bit harsh, all right? It's like Jen saying, hey, we're out of wine. And I go, woman, what's that got to do with me? All right? And that's not what's going on here, and hopefully not what goes on in my house either. You could probably put madame, or you could put lady. Those would be equal translations. In fact, some of your Bibles may say one of those. But he is making a distinction in the form of what does this have to do with me, that there is a separation between you and I. And again, you don't want to make too much of what's not in this text. But Jesus has risen up as the Son. He has walked for, give or take, 30 years. His dad is not mentioned in this passage. So dad is gone. Joseph has died at some point in time. We give John, he's not here today, so I won't embarrass him. We give John a hard time every now and then that he's going to be the one who takes care of us, okay, in our old age. And I always put myself in diapers and drooling and, and I say, and you're going to have to take care of that, all right? At some point, the child dependent becomes the one that the parent starts depending on. And some of you have made that transition with your own parents, okay? And this change in human and divine ways, I think, is happening right here. Right here. That Jesus is saying there is a distinction. And Mary is saying, I'm moving my dependency. I used to be the only guy in the house that could reach the bowls on the top shelf. Now John can be called on by Jen. Hey, can you get that for me? All right, he can reach higher than me now. And it continues that way normatively, but in this case, a sense of divinity as well. He's going to say, my hour has not yet come. Oh, I thought I listed these, but I didn't. I'm going to have to remember these. So I think if you go to John 7, John 8, John 12, you're going to see this phrase, my hour has not yet come. My hour has not yet come. When he goes to, I think, into the temple, my hour has not yet come. When they try to kill him, that's another one. There's actually several of them, more than the ones I studied. He walks through the crowd. My hour has not yet come. It's only towards the end. I think it's John 13. I think it shows up again in John 21. When he says, my time has come. And what he's referring to is his crucifixion, his death. Now, this is important because here is the annunciation of him coming out, of him showing his divinity. By the end of this text, he's going to manifest glory before humanity of himself. And he's announcing what that is ultimately looking like. So before the end of the game, he's calling the outcome. That I'm here to die. I'm here to die. My time's not yet. And his mother said to the servants, do whatever he tells you. And we as Protestants stay away from Mary because she has the plague, because she has been venerated and lifted up higher than she should in high church circles. But honestly, you should probably study her because she's the exceptional woman of the New Testament. If you get her at her she's 12, 13, 14, 15 maybe, when the angel comes to her and says, hey, by the way, you're going to have a baby and your betrothed isn't going to be the cause of that. It's going to be through a virgin birth. And basically she says, it's not my life anyway. Do with it as you please. And here she gets it. Woman, what does this have to do with me? My hour has not yet come. And I don't know if there's some coding, some turnover, or if this is just the word she used. Do whatever he tells you. And it could be, we got 50 sermons in this text, but that alone, if we as believers, as servants to the King, would just obey this statement, everything else would be fine. Do whatever he tells you. So Jesus' mom comes to him. There's no more wine. Wine, by the way, was a sign of joy. If you go back to Isaiah 55 or any number of places, it was the blessing of the nation. It was the sign of a presence of great blessing was the presence of wine. That song, and it's a great song, and we even sing it here. I think we sang it for our Christmas carol thing this year. The Mary Did You Know? I always scream in my head. I'll sit there politely as a pastor and listen to it. Oh, beautiful. But in my head, I'm always screaming, yes, she knew. She knew. If anyone knew, Mary knew. Okay? She knows. Did she know perfectly? No. But she knew more perfectly than everybody else on the planet, with the exception of maybe John the Baptist. But from the beginning to the end, Mary, she knew. The virgin, the angels, Joseph, Elizabeth's child leaps within her. John the Baptist pops out. Shepherds come. Wise men bring gifts. Herod tries to kill Jesus in the temple. Mary knew. Mary knew. So this dependency change is coming. My hour is not yet, but it has begun. Romans 3 talks about God displaying him publicly to establish him as Savior. We're going to see Jesus come and become the Lamb, and we're going to see him come again in the future and become the Lion. His annunciation is showing his consummation. He has come to die, and he has come to live. Now, there were 6 stone water jars. 6 is, again, like we said at the beginning, the imperfect number. 6 and 7 has been used for sermons upon sermons upon sermons. You got these empty clay pots, okay? They would have been sitting out in this thing. There was a Jewish ritual. You would wash your hands. They would wash each other's feet. You would wash the dishes. You would wash certain things to make everything kosher, so that you would be okay to go celebrate, to go be religious. The outside would be clean. My pastor, he thinks, and there's nowhere in there to say, he thinks that the jars probably had stuff on the bottom of them and had to be cleaned out, because the symbolism of what's going on here is you've got these clay pots that are empty, meaningless, without anything that is helpful. And that would have been where Judaism was in that day. That it had a lot of outward structure, a lot of outward cleaning, a lot of religious ritual, but there were no substance, just dregs perhaps on the inside. So for this Jewish rite of purification, they held 20 to 30 gallons, so that would have been 120 to 180 gallons. And Jesus said to the servants, fill the jars with water. And they filled them to the brim. And this is important because they fill them up where there's no room left. Okay? So it's not like the average table wine back then would have been 1 part wine, 2 parts water, or 2 parts wine, 1 part water. They watered it down, and that's how they drank it, okay? But here it's all water. There's no way to add anything in. We're not doing some kind of mixture here. They're filled to the brim. The water, obviously, you can go all over the place with what water represents in the Bible. Filled to the brim, nothing added to it, just like there's nothing added to the work of Christ. There is no work of men that's going into these jars. They are fully fulfilled by Christ. If we want to run with that illustration, the law would be represented by those purification rituals. The law cleansed you physically, but the law does not save us. But within that container of the law, salvation can be found. The law leads you to sacrifice, that being the Messiah. The law's purpose is to show us our incompleteness and point us to him, to bring us to Christ and then disappear. So the jars were to show us the contents. And he said to them, now draw some out and take it to the master of the feast. So they took it. When the master of the feast tasted the water, now become wine, and did not know where it came from, though the servants who had drawn the water knew. Inside simple understanding. The master of the house, the master of the ceremony, the high-ranking official who everybody would look to make sure everything was going right during this week-long festivities. He was in charge. He had control. He had the highest rank in the house, except maybe the bridegroom and the bride. But they were not to be working. They were to be social. And he hadn't a clue. But the servants, the humble, they were given inside information. They got it. Sometimes it's better to sit anywhere in the house of God than it is to sit at the right hand of the wealthiest person around. Oftentimes, it's those in power and authority that don't get it. I mean, if I were to ask you, name the ruling kings, presidents, prime ministers that truly walk with the Lord Jesus Christ today. If you could name me 10 out of 200 and something countries, I would be highly impressed. But it's usually those who are a little bit lower down that have come into some pain at some point in time. And they're close enough to the servant level that they can see what's going on. The master of the feast called the bridegroom, and he said to him, everyone serves the good wine first, and when people have drunk freely, then the poor wine. And everybody in this room gets it. You got to kind of turn your head and pretend like you don't when you're a Christian. But you serve the good wine first to get everybody a little tipsy, a little free feeling, so that the bad wine doesn't taste bad. Okay? Get through the first couple of 20 or whatever your rank is, 50-euro bottles of wine, and then bring in the whatever. But you have kept the good wine until now. I'm sure I've used this. It's such a great illustration that I've used it before. But in the South, when you have dinner over at someone's house, they'll come around and they'll pick up the plates and they'll, take everything. But they'll say, hey, keep your fork. Keep your fork. All right? And there was a lady who, when she was buried holding a fork on her chest. And everyone wanted to know, what did that mean? Why is she holding this fork in her coffin? And it was because of this Southern tradition. You keep the fork because there's going to be a little plate coming out, and there's going to be dessert. And dessert's coming. The best is coming. And so what she was symbolizing was, this life, it was good. But I'm keeping my fork because it's better yet. It's better yet. All right? You kept the good wine until now. And this, the first of his signs, his miracles, Jesus did at Cana in Galilee. And don't just read through this phrase, and manifested his glory. This is transfiguration language. This is, I am showing you who I am. I have come, I have been the good son, but now it's time. And it's the beginning of that manifestation. And notice what happens. His disciples had been following him, the 5, 6, 7 of them, and they believed that this sign pointed to something that he had already told them. And they thought, man, this is a really special dude. But then they saw the water to the brim. And was it instantaneous? Okay, you got it filled, great. Draw some out and take it. Why are we taking a cup of water to this guy? And as soon as they get it to the head, they realize that it's not a cup of water, but it's the best. Okay? Jesus is beginning to show what his mom knew in part, and yet what he came to display not just before her, but before all of humanity. Verse 12, he went down to Capernaum with, I don't know, it may be making too much of grammar here, but it's possessive. His mother, his brothers, his disciples. And he's going to unfold the plan of salvation in demonstrative ways for the next 3 years, starting with a few days here in Cana and then Capernaum. Some applications. My time has not yet come. Oh, this is where I listed them. I was saving them for the applications. So John 7, okay, is my time has not yet come, but your time is always here, because the Jews were seeking to kill him, but he walked. John 7:30, so they were seeking to arrest him, but no one laid a hand on him because his hour had not yet come. But then John 12:20, now among those who went up to worship the feast were some Greeks. So these came to Philip, who was from Bethsaida in Galilee, and asked him, Sir, we wish to see Jesus. Philip went and told Andrew. Andrew and Philip went and told Jesus, and Jesus answered them, the hour has come for the Son of Man to be glorified. Nikos asked me about this text a couple of weeks ago, and it just happened. I wasn't even planning on studying it yet. But what's going on here is it's the Greeks. He's making his move. It's not a Jewish thing. The purification rituals are left behind. The law is gone. It has been fulfilled in him. And the Greeks would be the all nations, other than Israel. And what Jesus is saying is, the hour has come for the Son of Man to be glorified, not just to Israel, but to all nations, as it was meant to be. In the Abrahamic covenant, it will be. Revelation 7, all tongues and tribes. He goes on in that passage to say, now is my soul troubled, and what shall I say? Father, save me from this hour? No, but for this purpose, this death, I have come to this hour. His time had not yet come. The purpose of that time was for him to die, to let everybody know who he was, and then to display that as the perfect sacrifice, and then to defeat death with the resurrection, which is where we're headed to celebrate in about 7 weeks. The water jars, application 2, used by Judaism, making them clean on the outside, the futility of religion without relationship. You can come to this place, you can sing our songs, you can listen to the guy up here, and you can bow your head, and you can walk, and you can cross all those things off your to-do list, and you can be completely lost. We have the ways of polishing the outside today as well, just like they did then. We can see their problems because we've got blinders on to our own. But those empty jars of Judaism, of Christianity without him, be filled with the water of salvation. And not just with that water, but the abundance of life of that water changed miraculously into wine. How much more, Hebrews 9, will the blood of Christ, who through the eternal Spirit offered himself without blemish to God, purify our conscience? It's not the outward washing. It is the blood of Christ. From dead works, because we can do nothing to add to it, to serve the living God. God saves through no human activity. Humanity did what it could. It filled the jars. But only Jesus could turn that to wine. A lot of bad news in the press these days. Keep your fork. The best is yet to come. Jesus came to die that we might live. We are to die as he died in these days, that we may live in those days as he has it for us to live. He has revealed his glory from water to wine and in many other ways. He has come. He bestows gifts generously. He enjoys the fellowship of his people. The high up are surprised at the way he does things, but the disciples believe. He's an amazing figure in history. Everybody likes to talk about Jesus. But he's not just amazing. He is to be worshiped. He is to be known. He is to be our life. And the question begs, where do we fit? Are we trying to add to the jars to do our work unto salvation? Can I be good enough? You cannot. You can't. The only way to Christ is through him. Through his blood, accepting his work done in your place of your sin. He removes that sin by his act of righteousness of dying for you on the cross. You can add nothing to it. We live in such a way that we do works for him to show others his divinity. That we lay our lives down that others may see him. That you yourself are supposed to be a sign, a miracle, a partaker in this divine transfiguration, this manifestation of his glory should be coming forth from you today. We're going to end in communion. And so I'm going to ask the fellows to come up. You guys have a communion song, is that correct? Okay. I'll ask the band to come up. I'll ask the fellows to come up and pass out the juice and the bread. We actually had a Mary turn nothing into juice today because we were out when we showed up, and our Maria went and fetched it. So we went from emptiness to fullness. Thanks. But take a moment as you do during this time to pause and reflect. If there's anything you need to do to restore that relationship with God, this is the time to do it. And then we will stand and take the bread and the cup together in the end.